Assalamu alaikum, dear listeners. This is Watan Radio Nizam Cedit. I'm your host Tariq Siddiqui. Welcome to our English special. And today we have our very special guest of honor, Mr. Zaid Hamid. Assalamu alaikum, sir. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam, Tariq. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, sir. I will go straight into the question with you since we are short in time. Do you think that a new strategy to deal with Pakistan is another stratagem of war concocted and indoctrinated by the Americans, Indians, and the Israelis at this stage?
One thing, Tariq, that you need to understand is that the Americans have lost the war in Afghanistan. I'm not saying they're losing the war. They've already lost it.
Right.
When an occupation army, after 9 years of occupation and brutally killing hundreds of thousands of people, still has no end of war in sight, still has no strategy in sight, having a demoralization level to that extent that the number of suicides increase the number of killed in action troops, then that is the stage when you know that the occupation forces have lost the war. Now, for the Americans, the only option now is to leave, is to exit Afghanistan. But they don't want to exit in a humiliating way. They don't want to convert it into another Vietnam. So what they want to do is have some kind of face-saving exit from where they can have a face-saving exit of saying that we have stabilized Afghanistan, at least half of it, and the southern region of Afghanistan remains in turmoil. Like now they're talking about the Lebanon option, where the Hezbollah controls certain segment of Lebanon and the government in Beirut controls certain part of Lebanon. So now, but to achieve all this, they need Pakistan. Because Pakistan, through Pakistan goes their supply line. And if Pakistan decides to make Afghanistan a graveyard for the American and the NATO forces, as we did in the 80s against the Soviets, then the Americans would have had it. Now, Pakistan for the last 8 or 9 years has been on the receiving end of the Americans. Americans have been dictating terms. Pakistan government have been forced to do what the Americans were telling them. But for the last 2 years almost, Pakistani intelligence services, inter-services intelligence and the army, they have developed a unique indigenous national security strategy which is radically different from what has been practiced during the Musharraf time. Now, what is happening is that now Americans want the Pakistan army to go to war with the Afghan resistance, the Pashtuns. Mullah Omar group, Jalaluddin Haqqani and Hikmat Yar. And this is where the Pakistan army is resisting, because Pakistan army is already having hands full fighting the TTP insurgencies, which Afghanistan has been pushing into Pakistan with the nexus of CIA, RAW and Mossad, as you had said earlier. Because already a massive high-intensity war within the borders of Pakistan is being waged by the Pakistan army against the insurgents, against the terrorists, the valley of Sawat, the South Waziristan, tribal areas, Mohammed Agency, Bajor Agency, Pakistan. In all these regions, army is heavily deployed and engaged. Now, army does not want to open more battlefronts. Common sense says that. Especially now, when they know that Americans would be leaving Afghanistan and the environment, the region would be controlled by the Pashtun resistance, which they call the Taliban or the anti-coalition militia, then it does not make sense for Pakistan to go to war with the Afghan resistance as well. We have not, and we will not do it, despite what the American pressure upon Islamabad and GHQ is these days. So the fact of the matter is that the Americans now, for the first time, are totally confused, disoriented. They have no objective or future strategy in sight, and are haphazardly trying to lock onto or latch onto something which would give them a face-saving exit. And that's where, on one hand, they want to put pressure on Pakistan, but on the other hand, they cannot make Pakistan too angry as well, because already the level of anger and frustration is increasing in Pakistan to such a level that any day NATO supply lines can be blocked. People could come out, block the NATO supply lines. Army could decide to block the supply line. The government in Islamabad is corrupt and incompetent and hold no control except corruption. And the Americans also know that the present government in Islamabad is not going to deliver them anything. So, and the real power center lies in GHQ, real power center lies with the people. So, the Americans, on one hand, are highly frustrated, very angry with Pakistan for Pakistanis are not doing their fighting. They're not doing their bidding now.
Right.
But on the other hand, they cannot push Pakistan beyond a certain limit. That's why you find that while Pakistan signs gas pipeline deal with Iran, the Americans had no choice but to remain silent. When the Pakistan signed a nuclear cooperation deal with China, Americans had no choice but to accept it. And now when the Pakistan army is refusing to go into the North Waziristan to operate against Jalaluddin Afghani network, Americans have no choice but to remain shut up on it.
Right.
So the point is for the first time we are seeing that ISI and the Pakistan army are having an upper hand on the Americans and the NATO forces in Afghanistan. And the strategy which the Americans have built for Pakistan of creating insurgencies, of destabilizing Pakistan, of pitching Pakistan army against the Afghans and the local militants, all this strategy has failed.
Right.
The success which the Pakistan army has achieved in Swat and Waziristan region is stunning, it's phenomenal. Americans, with all their technology and high-tech systems, have not been able to contain resistance even in a district of Afghanistan.
Right.
While in Pakistan, army completely mopped up the terrorist resistance of TTP in Swat Valley and South Waziristan in phenomenal time, actually.
Right.
And that is why the American game plan of destabilizing of Pakistan, support to low-intensity conflict, support to insurgencies, has collapsed. And this confidence that the Pakistan army has gained is now allowing Pakistan army and the ISI to be proactive, be aggressive. So far, Pakistan is not involved inside Afghanistan. But if the Americans fail to stop the insurgencies coming from Afghanistan into Pakistan, then Pakistan in near future might as well decide to go into Afghanistan and hit the Indian bases, hit the bases of the terrorists which are based inside Afghanistan, which are supporting the insurgencies, and creating a crisis for national security crisis for Pakistan. So the situation right now as it is that Pakistan is in dominant position.
Right.
ISI and CIA are locked into spy battles with each other, where CIA has been double-crossing Pakistan for the last so many years, is now exposed and desperately trying to hold on to its assets, which are being taken out by ISI and the army.
Right.
And the Indians are under intense pressure because now when the Pakistan is in a dominating position, Pakistan is forcing the Americans to control the Indians in Afghanistan. Otherwise, Pakistan would do the cleaning themselves.
Right.
And this is something that the Americans don't want, a Pakistan army operating inside Afghanistan. So this is a very interesting scenario that has built up. After post 9/11, Pakistan today is in the most strongest position to dictate its terms. And one thing is that Americans wanted Pakistan to go to war with the Afghan resistance.
Right.
And themselves, Americans, inside Afghanistan, Americans are talking about dialogue with the Taliban resistance. Americans are actually paying the Taliban resistance for safe passage and protection and for not attacking them. So while on one hand, Hillary comes here and asks Pakistan to do more, on the other hand, it's the Americans who are paying the Taliban and cutting peace deals with them just for their own protection.
Right.
And for ordinary people who do not understand the dynamics of war in Afghanistan, Soviet Union had 500,000 troops along with the might of a superpower behind them, but they could not contain Afghanistan.
Right.
American and NATO forces altogether are less than 150,000 in Afghanistan, out of which NATO is not involved in combat operations. The combat operations are only being done by the British, by the American, and by the Canadian forces.
Right.
So with this figure, you have about 75,000 troops who are engaged in fighting on Afghanistan. So there is no possibility that you can contain Afghanistan with 70,000 troops, no matter how much high technology you might have. So that is why you find all these operations, particularly in the south, the Marja operations, the Helmand operations, Kandahar operations, that one after another have failed, backfired, completely demoralized the occupation forces, and Taliban are gaining ground every day.
Right.
Now, that's why I said the war in Afghanistan is already lost for the occupation forces. It's only the drop scene that we are waiting. But before the Americans leave, or before they give an exit strategy, they really want to do a fair bit of killing there. They really want to create a fair bit of chaos. And for that, of course, while they want Pakistan to get into war with the Afghan resistance, Americans do not want Pakistan to play a constructive role.
Right.
But the fact remains that without Pakistan, there will be no peace in Afghanistan.
Right. Sir, we also regretfully have to report to our listeners that an AFTDPA, an Afghan trade agreement, has been signed in